Welcome to episode 2 of the Liz McMullen Show. Tonight my guest is Cate Culpepper. Welcome.
Hello from Seattle, Liz.
Welcome. You're my third guest, even though it's my second episode because we were first with Nell and Trinity talking about our harrowing Sandy experiences.
Yes, that was harrowing.
Indeed. But I think it's a perfect start to the more review part of my show to talk about some really wonderful, strong female characters. Mainly, I'm thinking about your Tristaine series.
Oh, great. I would love to talk about Tristaine.
So this is your brainchild. This is your baby, Tristaine. Tell me how you started it. What lent that kernel? What got you in the Amazon state of mind?
Okay, and you mentioned the show was 6 hours, correct?
Absolutely. 6 hours, and I offer notes with footnotes and, references and links,
Okay, cool. Well, sit back and put your feet up. Okay, so the way Tristaine got born, I actually started writing Amazon stories many years ago when I was in my 20s. I guess when I was first forming my own identity and who I wanted to know in the world. And so I wrote about the kind of women I hoped to attract in my life. As friends, as lovers, as everybody. And those became the Amazons of Tristaine. And then it was very cool for me when Xena, Warrior Princess, came on the air. Because two of the characters that I'd written about were very much like the two presented there. And so was the Amazon clan. That was in that series. And I've seen several other representations of some of my Amazon archetypes, I guess, in the literature and the fiction written by some of my friends. And it's really encouraging. It was great for me to find some of those people in my real life because I knew what to look for. I've been writing about them for years.
So your clan. Cool. You were forming your clan.
Yes. Yeah, very much like that. So that's kind of how Tristaine was born.
And the archetype, I've been wondering, chicken and egg kind of thing when it comes to Xena, is that a lot, I only got into Xena fan fiction maybe a couple years ago. My friend Andy from the Cocktail Hour introduced me to the whole genre, especially the Conqueror fiction, which I love.
Yes, that's wonderful.
And the thing is, sacrilege, but at the time I was a very moody edgy 20-year-old, and I did not think that Xena was the thing.
Right.
Sure. I was just too cool for Xena. So I was like, I loathe that show. I'm not going to pay attention to it when it's in the lesbian bar, whatever. So the chicken and egg problem I have is there are archetypal characters. The tall, strong, dark, brooding, antisocial, and the, sprightly lass with blonde hair who's got lots of pluck,
Right.
And obviously the Xena and Gabrielle characters step into that archetype. But one of the problems after the show, and I think due to some fan fiction, is that everybody saw things through Xena-colored glasses. Oh, this person is writing a Xena and Gabrielle story right here. Oh, here's the archetype again. And there is, honest to God, uber fiction out there. A good friend of mine writes it. But I always have that kind of tension. I'm like, just because that is similar to Xena and Gabrielle, that doesn't mean it was born with Xena and Gabrielle. But how do you feel about that? The fiction that you see around. Do you see a lot of the similar characters or...
Yes, and I'm really hoping not to step into a lot of feminist doublespeak because I'll probably use words I don't understand. So stop me if I get too wonkish.
Sure.
But my feelings about this is I, in my own stories, welcome any comparison that women want to make to Xena and Gabrielle. I think that they're symbols of qualities that we admire and that we want to find in other people. And I'm talking about people, not just about women. I think that we as human beings crave strength and we crave nurturing. And we, at least our small community of people, usually gay women, have come to see strength as a tall, dark warrior. And for me, the feminine was nurturing, and she was the more diminutive blonde healer. And that's how I saw those archetypes. But I think that those are really healthy models for us to pursue as women. The way I've seen them portrayed in Xena fan fiction and in the books of my friends, I think are invigorating compared to the dearth that was out there in terms of lesbian fiction when I was growing up, when I was in my 20s. So I say more power to us. Bring on the Xena. Any comparison to that, I just feel is flattering.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that in your latest novel, which we'll get to later, A Question of Ghosts. I felt like there was... you have the Tristaine series, and then you have Fireside and Riverwalker. And Fireside and Riverwalker are, a departure from the created world of Tristaine and, the totalitarian society that they were a counterpart to. But, I was wondering, like, when you were creating, circling back to Tristaine for a moment, when you were creating that world, what brought that on? It was was that book 1983? I don't know if I'm remembering the title of the book correctly, but there's a book that, shows the future, as this awfully controlled environment, and then the desire to burst free from it. So what, I know that you found like the Amazon characters and you loved Xena, but what made you create the culture that this is the counterculture of? Like, how did you create the city and the rules that are interesting?
Okay, I think that probably Tristaine the Clinic, the first novel in the Tristaine series, was sort of founded in my horror after Reagan and multiple Bush administrations and the rise of Homeland Security, and how frightening I found some of the loss of civil rights that were happening all around us in the name of supposed safety, and what we were willing to sacrifice in the name of safety. And I told you I had been writing stories about Amazons for years by that time. And I don't know if you remember a Xena fan fiction writer named Judy. She went by Wishes. She wrote a story that really inspired the characters as they first appeared in the city. And with her permission, I kind of adapted them into my first story, The Clinic. But it came out of my own, I guess, my personal horror, what was happening in the country politically at that time. And I found so much strength with writing these characters as protagonists that might address some of those concerns that came up. So it was just a really welcome inroad for me to adapt these stories into a full-length novel.
The other thing that I've seen in not just the Tristaine series, but this concept of a future society with almost dark ages technology. One of the series that I was thinking about in terms of like the future is the past is Jane Fletcher's Solano series. And the concept for that series was there was a group of, explorers, I suppose, and they brought with them everything that they would need to colonize a new planet, all different types of scientists and, geneticists and everybody that you would need to make a new society. And the problem was that I think all but one actually arrived, maybe two, and they arrived at this world, but they didn't realize their warp drive was off. And not only did they miss their mark, but anybody that they had known in the past has already passed on because they had gone so far. And one of the reasons why the technology, even though this is future as past, is that even though, they came from a modern society, the people who were there were not, the computer scientists and the architects. It was the geneticists and, the few of the other folks that were there, some geologists. So even though they were modern people, when they came into this world, they had to kind of start from scratch. So, literally having blacksmiths and, bowers, like people making bow and arrow and whatnot. So it's that kind of society. And what I find was interesting in the Tristaine series is it almost had a parallel to that. There was the city and its oppressive nature, and then there were the Amazons. And even though seen backwards by those in the city, they actually were very progressive in terms of ideas and the way that they treated each other and how they developed their clans and their system of ruling each other and whatnot and being a part of a team. So, that particular concept appeals to me. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Tristaine series worked for me so well, because, it matched up with what I liked with Jane Fletcher's work, where, you have all these really strong women together. And obviously, the different archetypal characters that we mentioned before, could be also found in Jane Fletcher's series. Although, unlike any other series that does that, Jane Fletcher's characters all pretty much look the same, as in they have the same hair color for the most part and the same skin tone, because they created this just, I guess when they were creating this one society, this is how it worked out. Kind of a mixture, as opposed to, in the Tristaine series, it's very, even though it's a counterculture, there seems to be, elements drawn from, the Scottish and the Irish and the English or the Spanish or, the Eastern. Everything is in there. What inspired you to create all those different, take all those different people as an amalgam rather than a melting pot?
Okay, first of all, with your example, the Solange series, we were in the hands of Jane Fletcher. Jane Fletcher is my goddess when it comes to world building. When I read her books, I just kind of piece popcorn into my mouth and follow the maps and the introduction. She is wonderful at creating these deeply textured and nuanced worlds. By comparison, Tristaine is very simple. What I see is so much more of a relationship-centered story than the intricacies of the worlds that some of my friends are able to create, and I stand in awe of them. Because, Liz, I am a technological weenie butt. In terms of creating these wonderful computerized scapes or these other, a gun box, someone like that, creating that kind of detail, I just stand in awe of. And the simplicity of Tristaine kind of goes along, I guess, with that much simpler way of seeing technology in the world. I purposely did not create the city as being a highly computerized and digitized society, because I wouldn't know how the hell to write that.
Oh!
I would have to call upon so many people. And,
goodness! I'm sorry to interrupt you at that point. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, it's bad. I told you, this is my first Skype call.
Oh, yes.
I'm being dragged with great joy, mind you, into the modern technological age, mostly by the young people that I work with. But this is wonderful to me. So I was trying to apply very rudimentary elements of technology and creating the worlds of Tristaine. But you mentioned some of the similarities in some of Jane's characters. I guess by comparison, if I did have Amazons with a lot of different hair colors, that was fun for me. But I remember one of my first editors, Shelley Thrasher, now an author herself, called me to task for changing the hair color every single time I brought in a new Amazon, and I never went back to the original hair color referring to any of them. Mm-hmm. So I had to threaten to create a clan of entirely bald Amazons.
You do have a bald Amazon, though.
Oh, I do. Well, yeah.
A few of them.
I did try to give a lot of variety and diversity in the clan of Tristaine, because that's how I saw it. I think it would be drawing on, as the original Amazons were, the many different tribes and many different continents that came under that name. Mm-hmm. Amazons were always a very diverse lot, and I see if this is the last Amazon nation, the last remnant of it, then it would be a clan of great diversity in terms of race and ethnicity and age and faith and everything that you can think of. It was a fruit salad of a clan.
You like that word, that phrase, fruit salad, because I was reading, in A Question of Ghosts, you were describing a bookstore as a mystical fruit salad of a bookshop owned by a local branch of the Theosophical Society. I was like, fruit salad, that's great.
Yeah. Well, it's what I use at work a lot. I think it's just a perfect combination of a lighthearted way of portraying great diversity and delicious and everything. So highly desirable. I like fruit salad.
Well, which brings me to, like, I know I'm flopping back to your most recent book, but there, this is a quote. She may not have slept much the last few nights. She might have been distracted, irritable, but her appetite, as always, sailed along full titty to the wind, which made me giggle. Full titty to the wind. Us women go like, I know exactly what that probably feels like, and that's hilarious.
Yeah, I like Becca. Becca is very loose around language. She uses whatever words feel right to her. Mm-hmm. She's a woman in her 40s who can seriously say the word Marvy without any irony. I just like the way she uses language. I enjoy making her up. Right. And I like the fact that Becca has an appetite. She's not a slender woman, which is true of my Amazons and Tristaine, too. The women that I write about are often not slender or traditionally alluring in that way. So I like that about Becca as well.
I like that, too. And especially that is a departure from the Gabrielle, who's very, sprightly and slender and whatnot. One of the things that I guess when I picture Amazons, I picture very similar to what you put together, which is robust women. Whether they're curvy or just, very muscular and big and present and healthy, obviously divergent, because there's no way for everybody to sit down, agree, and like sing Kumbaya, and suddenly, because we have all these wonderful women here, we're going to get along and there'll be no wars and there'll be, I was like, yeah,
right.
Sure. You can think that if you like, but it's not human nature to be all...
Yeah, and I thought it was important to accept that human reality in writing these stories as well, to make maybe the clan of Tristaine was advanced or progressive in so many of the ways that all of us consider important. And I still do. I still believe in those values and ideals. But that doesn't mean that they weren't human, that there wasn't going to be crime among them or jealousy or all of the things that strong women have to deal with. So I had to make that reality as part of the clan as well.
Yeah, and it rings true with me because my parents were hippies. And my dad was a feminist, and he was sure to raise his one daughter as a feminist.
Okay.
But what's ironic is when you give somebody the freedom to explore themselves completely intellectually, very supported and whatnot, eventually they're going to, all this teaching of independent thought is going to lead to independent thinking, and sometimes your thoughts are not the same as your dad's thoughts. Ooh. And it's almost like, okay.
Yeah, it's called adulthood, huh?
Yes! It's like, stop questioning me. What?
Yeah. That can be tough in dealing with parents.
Oh, Lord. But it was just so funny because I guess it's all about, once you leave that darling age where, you sit on the floor and your dad's sitting in a chair and giving these wonderful, long, historical dialogues, one-way dialogues, are not dialogues. But then when you as you get older, as I got older, I wanted to be in on the game. And when I was in college, Mount Holyoke is a very seminar centered learning experience. It's a small college, 2,500 women. Most classes, waver between like 15 and maybe 20 or 30. There are very few classes that are taught in amphitheaters. It's a very personal, very give and take thing. And that style of learning takes a particular type of professor. And my dad is a professor, and he's very brilliant. but he lectures. And so when you get somebody who wants a more Socratic experience with somebody who wants to continue to lecture, which he's got so much to share, but I'm like, I want to be a part of this. Let's be a part of this, and it didn't work out very well.
Oh, I can imagine. Okay.
But I mean, it makes me think of a lot of the different things that happened in the Tristaine series where there were disagreements on who should have been the queen of Tristaine, who's going to be the leader of the Amazon warriors, what's the best way to go about it, what's the type of relationship should be between the Amazons and the city. And that a lot of conflict in Tristaine gurgled, to the top because of that conflict of one, one character wanted to have a strong relationship with them and get, all the little fruits that they could pluck from the city tree while still wanting to live a lifestyle of the Amazons. And that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, I didn't want to suggest that even strong women on the right side were going to be purely united in the way they address their daily life. I couldn't imagine creating a utopia. Because that's not what I think strong women are about. I knew that there would be conflict, and it was fun to discover it as different Amazon personalities evolved. And kind of in the relationships of the main characters. I had this romance going on between Justin, the Amazon warrior, and Brenna, who was the city medic. And that was kind of playing out against the development of Shan as the queen of Tristaine. And just all of that political stuff had to come in there, and that conflict resolution, and, oh yeah, the demon who bursts people into flames and hides in trees. It got very complicated over the years.
One of the things I liked about the clinic and Brenna was that she's even in her alcoholism, she's a strong, smart woman who's trying to hold it together. Yeah, she's got like zip ties and duct tape, holding her life together. And she's making it through. She's surviving. She's making it through a very oppressive system, and she's a functioning alcoholic, but an alcoholic nonetheless. And one of the reasons why she is so stilted is because of all the ways that the city just, shrivels up personal choice. Like, you can only have really bland artwork. You can only be involved in certain level of conflict with the government, in terms, poets and creative people, whatnot, were not as welcome in the city. But she kept on keeping on, and enough to be a part of a very big study with, the evil scientist Castor. And she wasn't immediately pulled on board with Jessitin. She just was curious about it and slowly started to, think about growth, thinking about leaving that little bit of her life, to the point where her connection to Jessitin and her growing sensual experience with her was slowly drawing her to the light, to the flame, to feeling human again, and I liked that. I liked how stark and cold and awful everything was, and then how Brenna works her way through it.
Well, thank you. I hope one of the things that came through with Brenna was one of her strengths, or one of the things that I think helped keep her from turning too cold, at least, helped preserve her humanity, was her relationship with her younger sister, Sammy. They kind of grown up together in what was basically a bad foster home. And she loved Sammy a lot, and Sammy played a big part of her life, even when she went to Tristaine. So I think that helped humanize her. I think her relationship with Justin was the first time Brenna really fell in love, and that physical attraction was there. But also Jess's introduction of a society that Brenna had never even imagined, and the stories she told her about it. I think those proved really alluring for her, and part of her arc throughout the whole series was going from that mystified bystander who knew nothing about Tristaine to realizing that she was destined to rule it someday.
Yeah. And the other thing that I liked about starting with people on opposite ends of experience, Jessica being strong and self-actualized and content and grounded and skilled as an Amazon warrior. And Brenna, even though she was living in an oppressive society, she kind of made her way into her particular role. But at the same time, she still questioned a lot of the dictums, especially medical ones that she felt were in conflict with actual medicine, like freezing Jessica, leaving her exposed. Like she found her that the night before or whatever, she had been exposed to air conditioning with very little clothes on, and her lips were blue. And Brenna's like, this is not right.
Sure.
She wasn't about to jump out and like stick her neck out or anything, but these little kernels of this is really unethical. This is not what I signed up as, for medicine. And then Castor's always trying to like lure her back and say, well, you don't understand these people. In order to break them, we have to do these different things. So once we learn how to break them and make them behave like good little citizens, then everything will be fine.
Right, but Castor was not aware of the fact that Brenna had been raised for her first 3 years of life. This is not a spoilerish conversation, correct?
No.
Okay. That Brenna had been raised by Shan, that Shan was her mother, the queen. Mm-hmm. And that Shan had raised her for the very beginning of her life. Mm-hmm. And that gave her kind of a hard foundation of morality mm-hmm. and of seeing right from wrong pretty clearly, that has always conflicted with the way Brenna has been kind of coerced into practicing her profession, her art, mm-hmm. which is healing. And so...
Which is, it's also a connection. Like, when you read the first story, you don't realize that Shan is Brenna's mom.
Oh, you don't until... I didn't. I had no idea.
I was the writer. I didn't know until...
Yeah. I'm not sure if that came... I might have revealed it in the second book, Battle of Tristaine, but only if you were reading real carefully and were almost prescient. I don't know how else you would know, but it finally came out, I think, in the last book or the second to last book.
But yeah, the thing is, you plant seeds in there. Like, I don't know how to do the warrior, the queen's cry or whatever that she kept, Jerikai or something, I can't think of what it was, but she would hear something and then Brenna would hear something and then she'd act.
Jahika rise.
That is it. Thank you. I was like, I can't remember how to say it.
I did on language translators. All the words that I use in the Tristaine books that seem unfamiliar mm-hmm. were at least well-intentioned attempts to translate words that I intended. Like Jahika is some African language for queen. I don't remember which one or what context, but all of them have some association like that.
Okay.
Hi.
No, I do see, one of the things that kind of amuses me is all this cross-pollination of language, accent, and, there's a lot of Spanish that gets, floated around there, and some of the Amazons have these really thick brogues, which are awesome, to mm-hmm. kind of picture in your head.
Yeah, I try to do a public reading of a Tristaine story.
Uh-huh.
I embarrass myself constantly trying to do Jess's brogue.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Lord.
Yeah, I come out sounding Yiddish every time. It's not pretty.
Do you know, I mean, it would test, I don't know if they call a voiceover actor or something like that, somebody who would just read the stories. It would take somebody with a lot of, what's it called? Kind of like Robin Williams, but he's a little on steroids about like being very speedy about all the different connective language and ideas are. But I could picture him being able to do a pretty damn good reading of a Tristainian story.
Well, yeah, I think the person you're describing is anyone but me.
Oh no,
Yeah,
Kate.
I love doing readings. I think they're fun, and I have a good time with them. But Tristaine, those stories are the hardest for me to read, just because they do call for a lot of different dialects, a lot of different brogues, and I am somewhat limited in that capacity.
Well, I mean, not many of us folks, I work with young children and read them stories, and I know how, it is to read those kind of like the different intonations and stuff like that, and, voices that you can make. But when it comes to something as diverse and complicated as Tristaine can be in terms of, it's what I think of it almost visually. You know how a glacier will go and pick up rocks as they go along the way. And I feel like the Amazon tribe is this, act of nature, this, and, it just picks up all the different wonderful things and also not so wonderful, but human things as it goes along. And it seems that the tribe has all sorts of, not just people from different countries, but different skills. Like some people are fantastic cooks. Others are amazing healers. Others are, like Jessica, really gifted warriors. And then the other thing that I find interesting about the Amazons is that they're not wholly separate. Just because you're a medic doesn't mean you can't take care of yourself.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, you're a pacifist and you need to like hide behind the skirts of somebody like Justin.
All right. Yeah. Tristaine has 7 clans, or 7, I don't even know what I called them. What were they? They're like sub-clans, little cadres. Anyway, 7 categories that women could choose to join, like, guilds. They were the Healers Guild, the Growers Guild. And to Brenna's astonishment, she finds herself that she can see dead people.
I see dead people.
Yeah. And she ends up working with the Seers Guild as well. So there are these little sub-communities that I think help bring out the best in each woman in terms of contributing to staying. But that's definitely the focus, is serving your sisters, making sure everybody is okay. It's very much a collective type village in structure.
Absolutely. And the whole concept of it takes a village to raise a woman and a child into, man or woman. But because of the nature of many new Amazons are people who are refugees fleeing from different cities. And
Right.
so raising Amazons can happen to full-grown adults. They go through learning, basic self-defense. And of course, if you're getting skin knees and whatnot, you need to know how to, patch up an Amazon warrior, all the little basic set of skills you need to survive in the wild, I can go on and on and on.
Oh, it's fun revisiting these Amazons. I've missed them.
I think they're wonderful. I'd like to be an Amazon. I'd like to live. But you know what? I realized that no. I mean, it's very romantic, the idea of being an Amazon, but I'm such a city girl.
Okay.
That, I love looking at bucolic sites, like I lived in Ireland for a year and all these wonderful green spaces. But, one of the reality of green spaces are bugs.
Oh, yeah, true.
Oh,
true.
And they love me. They love to bite me and suck my blood. So I'm like, if I'm going to go hiking, can we go when it's really cool and there's no like bugs to bite me or whatever?
Right. Yeah, and I've gotten different requests over the years. One of the comments I've gotten from readers about the Tristaine stories that have pleased me more than any is they say they'd love to live in a Tristaine. They would like to be Amazons living in this clan. But they do have some conditions, and no bugs is often one of them. Creating some kind of technology that would at least allow an iPod is another. There's a lot of them like that. So feel free, design your own Tristaine. That's sort of what the plans for.
That sounds kind of fun. Yeah, my partner and I are in the same boat. Well, she's a little bit more so than me. But she's like, yeah, I'd love to rough it, go into the woods because she loves fishing.
Uh-huh.
But only if we have a log cabin with running water and electricity and heat.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we've both been blessed enough to have most of our basic needs covered at any one time. You've had recent challenges with that, just with your own experiences, and learned to value, I'm sure, all over again, just having a warm, solid ceiling over your head.
Yeah, what Kate's talking about is my partner and I were in the Barrier Islands and the Jersey Shore. That was hit pretty solidly by Sandy. And, but, we were able to, it was such a short period of time where, we were in peril, so to speak. The storm, started to gurgle up on Sunday. There was lots of wind and whatnot, but we were like, oh, I can't get that bad, This house has been, my family's owned the house in Ortley Beach for over 20 years. And it existed for quite some time before we bought it. And my family had been coming to Ortley Beach since my grandfather, who just turned 90, his family was coming to the same town, we've been almost like 100 or so years, visiting this area. I'm like, nothing really big. I mean, it's not going to be big. Irene was, such an anticlimax for at least where I lived in Hoboken last year. So I was like, nothing big's going to happen. And then the house began to shake. On Monday, the house was rattling, from the wind. And it was really entertaining for us because we were bored. It's really dead down the shore, once the summer ends. And so we were laying in bed together and the house was shaking. I'm like, ooh, magic fingers. But at the same time, after a certain point when it got to be very extreme, like the wind, I just decided that I was going to be a big chicken and I was going to sleep through some of it.
Yeah.
The equivalent of like sticking your head underneath a blanket and going like, I'm going to believe this doesn't exist right now. I'm going to go to sleep.
Right. Sure.
And the wind actually became more, I don't know, reasonable. And then the flooding was interesting because like my friends were freaked out that we stayed. Our family was freaked out that we stayed. So we had a lot of people texting and calling and whatnot. And my one friend, Alex, who just couldn't believe that I stayed, but she and my friend Adrian were my two contacts because because there's only so much electricity that you're going to have and your cell is going to die out. So I'm like, I will contact these people, and these people will contact everybody else. And Nelia did the same on her side of the family. So I just texted Alex, it's windy, and, it's a little misty. It tastes like seafood in the air. But nothing really big is happening. So I sent that text. Then I start walking down I tell her, it's nothing. And I start walking down the stairs and she's like, you're blind. I'm like, what do you mean I'm blind? There's a river out there. I'm like, what are you talking about? I would not miss a river. What are you talking about? So I come back up and look out we have glass sliding doors that go out on our deck. And there was a river running down the street. I said, I may not, like I'm going blind, I'm only 35. Like I may not, see awesome, but I would not have risked a river.
Oh my gosh.
Because before then there was just like this little puddle around like the gravel and whatnot. It's like, oh, this is not a big deal. And then my joke is a river ran through it.
Oh man, scary as hell.
And we're sick puppies because we were entertained. We're like, oh my God, check that out. Because we knew, because like Ortley Beach is an isthmus, on an isthmus, even though it's considered a barrier island, which I didn't learn until after Sandy, because that's the way it kept on referring to where I used to live.
Okay.
And so we were about 5 blocks away from the ocean and 5 blocks away from the bay. And I was like, baby, I think they just merged. And so the flood was coming, and we're, doing different preparations. Like, I'm like, oh, we got to bring the, all the food upstairs because there's flooding, blah, blah, blah. And then she's organizing the refrigerator. I'm like, baby, come on. We have to go downstairs and get the water from the car before the water, gets up to our car. And so, like, I'm holding the door that's, like, rattling, and the wind is whipping. And she's, like, running and getting all the... We had like 3, cases of water, and we brought them inside. And then we closed the door, and then we're like, oh my God, the water's coming up. You don't have front lawns in the beach. We have like cement. So it was coming up, getting closer. Then it's at there's only one step up before a second step comes into the house. And then I was like, oh my God, check that out. And eventually there were white caps.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. But, Ellie and I had been bored all summer because the family just moved down there in July for permanently. Sold the house in Hoboken, moved down there permanently, late June, early July. So going from being able to have access to New York City, which is where most of my social life was centered on, and then going to being down the shore, which is beautiful, but there's nothing to do. So we were bored for months, and then, oh, check this out. And like, oh my God, your car's a boat.
Oh, man.
So we're sick. Yeah, because we thought that was entertaining. And then the water, and instead of the water, coming through the door, which is what we thought would happen, it gurgled up from the crawl space. Bloop, 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 bloop. So, and then it flooded. But whatever it was, like we were just, we worked well in a crisis. That was fine, and it was only a few days, and we were slightly inconvenienced. Like there was no running water, so we couldn't bathe. But we had a tub full of water so we could flush. And we had food, and we were dry, and our part of the house was untouched. So for us, it was mildly inconvenienced, but it's not the same thing as going, you'd never catch Ilya in a tent. Like when I went to my 5th, was it 5th? No, it was my 10th reunion with her. One of the things that some of the people in Mount Holyoke would do was stay in a dorm to kind of relive that experience. Like each dorm has, one graduating class in it. And she's like, she couldn't deal with the communal showers. Never mind the great wild, Anywho, I wanted to walk into A Question of Ghosts because that's your latest book. Do you want to give a little summary about it?
Well, I've called Riverwalker, which is the book I wrote right before A Question of Ghosts. It's sort of my love letter to my hometown in New Mexico.
Okay.
And A Question of Ghosts is set here in Seattle, where I live now, and I call it my like letter to Seattle. I'm very fond of Seattle, but you wouldn't... Well, the things that I point out in Seattle, some of my favorite places are like an insane asylum and a cemetery and, all the really romantic, great places in my city. Mm-hmm. But that is where A Question of Ghosts is set. And it introduces the characters of Joanne Call, who is a scientist who's able to record the voices of the dead, and Becca Healy, who is a 40-ish social worker, who is hearing the voice of her dead mother through the static of a radio. Mm-hmm. And it's what the dead mother is asking. This is the question of ghosts that they have to answer in this book, and deal with a really tumultuous relationship that's building between them as well. Mm-hmm.
What I had mentioned earlier in the episode, talking about the archetypes of the Amazon, warrior, Azina and Gabrielle, The Question of Ghosts really kind of clicked into my memories of the Xena fan conqueror fiction. Mm-hmm. Just in the aspect that Joe was tall, dark, and handsome, I guess, but very socially stunted. And in the Xena fan fiction for the Conqueror fiction, one of the things that I felt was one of her Achilles' heels, her foibles, was her lack of understanding, social understanding, and humanity. Because she was so used to, being the destroyer and the conqueror of people and, heartless and doing evil, awful things, that she had no in touchness with her humanity and was much more apt to like fly off the handle. And Jo is so stiff. She's so inside of herself. But the irony is the type of science that she does is with something that is considered a soft science, paranormal activity, EVPs, hearing voices through different devices or recording devices. So it's kind of funny to have somebody so social, like, I think they tried to figure out a way to describe her. It's almost like Asperger's or similar to a type of autism where she doesn't really understand nuances. So she studied real hard, like the different facial expressions and what they mean emotion-wise. But she doesn't really do emotion until she and Becca spend more time together.
Right. I hope that Jo comes across as a fairly strong character, because of the very talents that you mentioned, her scientific ability, her ability to record these voices, and her extraordinary academic achievements. Mm-hmm. But this disability, to use a word, that she deals with has been socially crippling for her. Mm-hmm. So I really consider this book, A Question to Go, is probably the first Xena-esque book I've written. Mm-hmm. Because these two characters, Jo and Becca, are the archetypes again. They're strength and nurturing. Mm-hmm. And Jo is not able to connect with people. She's not able to give or receive that kind of gentleness and nurturing that Becca does as easily as she breathes. That's what she does. She's a carer. She's a nurturer. And so bringing these two characters together was kind of recreating that whole dynamic. And that was fun. Also, just challenging, having someone with Jo's struggle, being able to connect to anyone, and Becca trying to make inroads into all of that resistance was so fun to write. It was two cool characters to create. I had a good time with them.
I liked watching, because there's definitely Becca's influence, but I liked watching the gentle bravery of Jo. Bravery in terms of like slow, it's almost like sun just starting to kiss the land as it comes up. Like she's just so in the dark, but she's trying. And one of the reasons you have a lot of nods to the series, Xena, is because even though Jo seems very straight-laced and all business and really no ability to do any casual friendships or little chit chat, she loves Xena. And even though she doesn't know how to be with people, she's always wanted a clan. And you slowly see that she is building a clan of her own that crosses over with Becca's, but it's like these, when she allows herself to enjoy a kindness of Becca's, whether it's a brief touch or a hug or whatever. I really enjoyed that, watching her grow, because she was so shut down. And these little glimpses of her growth are just really beautiful. I liked it a lot.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that you appreciate her. I think along with Jo's straight-lacedness, which is certainly true, there's kind of an inherent gallantry. I think Jo's very courtly.
Yes.
As a way of being brave.
Very, very formal.
Yeah, in that way, but also there's a real sweetness to her, and I think that a passion and her protectiveness toward Becca, and that's what Becca connects with first, is that understanding on a real basic level that Jo wants to protect her, that at least that bond was formed. And yeah, Jo is able to reach out to a clan. It's sort of a theme that I had in the Tristaine novels and also in Fireside, and I think is inherent again in A Question of Ghosts, is the need we all have to have a clan, to have a family of supportive friends.
Mm-hmm. I just think, I think some characters are like the sunlight and water on a beleaguered plant. It seems like nothing would grow on Jo, so to speak. because she was so, like you describe her vision as laser-like and disturbing and spooky. But it's almost as if, separately, that she had been a study of human nature and behavior because she wanted to be a part of the world, but she didn't know how to be a part of the world. And Becca is her guide, slowly showing her how to be a part of the world, like, courtesy, being, no matter how you feel about somebody, Becca tells her, you need to be kind and courteous to the people in my life. You can't just snap at them or, get really possessive and want to strangle Mitchell, who's her uncle, or anything along those lines. So she's slowly learning how to interact. And, but Becca, shows her a lot of things in addition to the School of Becca, which comes up fairly often. And she's like, I don't need you to come in your white horse and rescue me, but I do appreciate your hand in the small of my back as I stand up to, like, my demons, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that says it fairly well. Jo is, her entire reason for going into studying electronic voice phenomenon is her longing to connect to another human being. That's what she kind of sums up. The whole reason she started this career was she's fascinated by voices that are so connected to another person who's alive that they can reach past death to try to reach them again. And she always listens to these voices that are calling out to someone, and it's a mystery. It's the mystery of her life is how someone connects that much. Mm-hmm. And so Becca you're right about the whole seed thing, but I think when Becca comes along, it's falling on pretty fertile ground. I think Jo is ready for this, Becca in her life.
She doesn't know that she's ready.
Well, she doesn't feel ready for Becca.
Nobody's...
That's a surprise.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, yeah, and Becca's a little bit put off, too. She does not imagine that Jo would be someone that she'd ever fall in love with, and I think she's as astonished as anyone when it happens.
What I found interesting was that Becca had, given up on her finding a partner, even though that's something that she wanted. And Jo even assumed that she was single because she chose to be. Rather than that's just the way that it worked out. So even though Becca is wonderful at friendship, and you would think that kind of, knowledge of social interaction would play with everything, because that's what Jo assumes. But it just didn't carry over into her love life.
Right, and I worked a lot on this with my beta readers, Jill McKnight, and Connie Ward, who's the publicist at Bold Strokes Books. Mm-hmm. They worked on virtually every novel I've ever written with me. And I remember Jill was talking to me about Becca and the trauma she'd been through. She virtually witnessed murders of her parents, right? And was brought up by two very stiff and formal relatives. And yet she was this loving creature. How can she, and she endured, high school or adolescent addiction to heroin. I mean, this woman's been through a lot. So I think probably the fact that she is still nurturing and that is the archetype that she is able to fulfill says a lot about Becca. That's her essence, that she was able to retain that caring for others and that connection. But I think there's also a real reason that she has not loved somebody. She didn't have a great example of what a marriage could be, So if she grew up believing that her mother killed her father, I can see why intimacy of that nature would be difficult for her.
And of course it's not going to be a spoiler, but there's more than one way of considering a ghost. There's, like the ghosts of your past, which may be the things that have happened to you in the past, things that you can't move beyond. There are, there's her mother and father, but her mother, Maddie, is the only one who's in touch with her. So there's an actual ghost. And then there's a lot of playing with there's a certain layer in polite society, where you just don't talk about these things. And these things included, for Becca's family, included not talking about her mother really, and not talking about her father. Mm-hmm. And anytime there was tension, and you even have this dinner scene where Joe meets Patricia and Mitchell and Rachel, and they're all at the same dinner table, and she's so cut to the bone. Joe's like, let's just talk about things. Can we stop meandering around these things? Can we just confront reality? Because first of all, I don't know how to do that gerrymandering thing. Second of all, can we just talk plainly, please? And the second she bristles, like she's like, "Arr!" And then like, well, you don't understand, and da 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 da.
Right. Yeah, Joe doesn't really even ask permission. She just starts talking. And Becca, I think, is characteristically horrified at Joe's lack of social skill, mm-hmm. But there's also really necessary information they need to get out of that meeting. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting putting, what were they, 5 characters together, mm-hmm. and trying to project each of their personalities and their agendas, and, hiding secrets that I know I couldn't reveal for several chapters. This was the first murder mystery I've ever written, and I guess the first full-on ghost story, too, so that was fun, along with the other challenges of Joe and Becca and stupid technology. I had to look into what a rich person drives, things like that. How would I know?
Well, why ever not? Don't you have a golden keyboard? And
No, honey, I'm a social worker like Becca, and we both have lousy cars. Everything she says about her car, I'm hoping my car isn't hearing this, but people work with salaries in Seattle, they're true.
I've been trying to characterize it during this conversation, but I think Joe lacks socialization, but she's a vehicle as well, a catalyst, because without socialization, she doesn't see all the things that she should be doing or ignoring or not speaking about or, not interrupting or whatever. She's just like, why aren't you talking about these people? What exactly happened? What's going on here? And Becca's like, oh, you gotta, you needed Joe. You needed, as debilitating as her limitations are, you needed her to cut through the shit and get to the root of the matter, because these folks will nice each other out, and then nobody knows anything or talks about anything, and nothing gets solved. And people are just being way too polite. And in some cases, for the story, you needed a little impoliteness,
Well, yeah. And I think Joe's reacting to the character of Mitchell, Becca's uncle, and the fact that he is rude, and Joe perceives that as being disrespectful of Becca. So there's some emotion going on here. But I don't imagine Joe has ever been a very sensitive interviewer. Mm-hmm. I imagine she cuts to the chase pretty quickly, and she's talking about painful deaths in this family that have not been discussed in years. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty clumsy situation for her to walk into, and she handles it characteristically badly. Mm-hmm.
But it works, and I don't know if you ever saw the film St. Elmo's Fire. But there was, I can't remember the characters' names, but there was this woman, and she came from a very affluent family. And they were sitting around the dinner table. It was, formal dinner. And her mother, whenever she says something unsavory, talks about a topic that's unsavory, she whispers. So, like, they had asked the Rob Lowe character, where did you meet? And he said, in prison.
Okay. Yeah.
So I liked it because it's very, when it comes to upper class or even, certain middle class, very kind patrician, I don't know, Protestant families, whatnot, who they just simply don't talk about certain things, or that's just not, that's not for polite conversation. And Joe knows nothing of polite conversation and just wants to cut to the marrow of it, not simply in this scene, but in other instances too. But what I saw with the characters is Becca has as much to learn as Joe does, even though somebody first encountering it would think that it was Joe who to be fixed up with, the duct tape and the zip ties and get her all together. But Becca needs help too. And it's not just finding out what's going on with the spirit voice, but she also needs to be able to have a loving connection to another person.
Yeah, and I think that in many ways is as precipitous an arc to travel as Joe's own journey. Becca needs to learn that she deserves a healthy, intimate relationship. She deserves a wife, and that it's okay for her to have that happiness, that she's good enough to have it, that she doesn't need to accept any kind of disrespect from her uncle. And Becca's amazingly healthy in terms of surrounding herself in her daily life with good people, but there's some lingering things that are really limiting her happiness and her ability to connect to other people. And that she has to learn that strength from Joe to say no. And to take the chance, as Joe is doing, of reaching for a very unlikely match and finding it perfect for both of them.
It really was truly perfect, and I wasn't. You unraveled things so slowly and had really good pacing, so that I found Joe's arc to be believable. And I also was kind of surprised to learn how much Becca had to learn in terms of, having romantic love. She has friendship love in spades, and she's a wonderful person, and she has, a love affair with chocolate.
Of course, yeah.
She's the most chocolate-loving lesbian I've ever read about.
Oh, she's fun to write about. There are a couple of things that I've noticed in our lesbian heroes in our fiction. They tend to be slender, and they almost never sleep. I mean, never, Liz. Most of our lesbian protagonists are up for 48 hours at a time, usually working. Becca eats a lot of chocolate. She loves naps. She's just more like my friend. She's more like the kind women that I know. And yeah, chocolate's I love writing her stuff. Joe is amazed watching her eat. And she's not a glutton. She's not a particularly big woman, but she's curvaceous. And she enjoys food.
Yes, women who eat. Amazing.
Yeah.
What I thought, as one of my final comments, because we're going to bring this interview, sadly, to a close.
Right.
But it was the first meeting in a lesbian bar where Joe gets to meet Becca's friends, Marty and Khadijah.
Khadijah.
Right. And at first they're all eating and Joe has no interest in eating. She's just, kind of bugging out and, trying to cope. And then Joe starts to warm up when she's talking about her passion, which is, these voice recordings and all the stuff that has to do with her research. And she warms up and starts to share. And there was this line that said, "And their food was forgotten." And you've probably, everybody's encountered that in a book. Oh, their food was forgotten because they were so thick in a conversation. But the fact that Becca had forgotten her food.
Yeah.
That was some serious stuff there, because usually, as I mentioned earlier, she's saying, her appetite runs tits to the wind. So if something makes her pause and forget her food, that's a pretty significant thing.
She was pretty intrigued. True. Oh, I'm glad you caught that. Thanks.
Yeah, I was like, and then, I was like, yeah. And then she forgot her food. She forgot her food.
I should have made the end of the chapter.
Cats and dogs are living together. It's mass hysteria.
Exactly.
Ghostbusters reference for those of you out there. I want to thank you for coming to my little playground, Kate. It was great talking to you.
I've enjoyed our time together, Liz. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. We'll have to get together again because why don't you tell us a little bit about some upcoming projects of yours? I think you mentioned that you have at least another book in the hopper.
I am working on one now that was recently contracted with Bold Strokes Books. It's called Wendigo Thrall, and it reunites Joe and Becca from A Question of Ghosts and the two leads from my earlier book, Riverwalker. Grady and Elena are with these two. It also introduces a new couple who I think are kind of romantic. It's fun to have them in the mix, but it's sort of an ensemble piece of these 6 women who are stuck in a cabin during a blizzard up on Mount Rainier. And if you know anything about the Wendigo, you might know what comes next.
Some shrieking, I'm sure.
There's shrieking ensues. Yeah.
And
it's,
then
it's a horror story, probably more of a horror story than I've written before, but it's also a romance. Mm-hmm. And just, it's so much fun to write. I'm really enjoying it.
Well, I have a different pop culture candy, and that was Charmed.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Which is, I didn't get into Xena, but I loved me some Charmed to ad nauseum. I've seen all the episodes. And the reason why I know what a Wendigo is because Piper became a Wendigo in one of the episodes.
Oh, I'll have to Netflix Charmed.
So I was like, a Wendigo? I know about Wendigos.
Okay, so was the Wendigo a cannibal spirit in Charmed?
No, I can't remember all the details, but I just remember the physiological change that she was going through. She had been scratched and then, it started to infect and then get into her system and then she changed into one. But I don't remember. I mean, it's been a long time, but the episode is either called Wendigo or something along those lines. It's like, I know what that is, sort of.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me know. Without revealing any spoilers, if we're talking about a story that involves cannibals, Joe may or may not be eating Becca. You'll have to buy the book to find out.
That sounds hot. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Okay.
All righty then. Good night.
Thanks so much, Liz. Good night from Seattle.
Good night from Brooklyn.